Hi, this is Anthony for MakeWeirdMusic.com, and on the phone we have Terry Bozzio, the incredibly innovative musician, composer, and drummer. Terry, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate that.
Thanks. I'm glad blushing doesn't show up on audio recordings.
Yeah, so I have been following you for some time, and I just saw you with your solo drum tour at the Musical Instrument Museum in Phoenix for the second time, and it was just such an incredible show. So thank you so much for doing what you do, and I really appreciate you bringing music and art to the stage.
Well, thank you. It's really my pleasure, and I can't say enough about that facility. It's one of my favorite places in the world to go and check out, and also to be able to play there in such a beautiful theater. So I always talk about, a theater is a church for music, and I love the fact that my audience is above and can look down and see me, and also be comfortable and in such beautiful surroundings to be able to give themselves to whatever comes out of me in the moment on the night.
So one thing that I picked up on is a real sense of inner peace and focus. I see a lot of musicians perform, and I don't see them so attuned to what they're doing and focused in the moment. And it seems like a lot of what you do, particularly with ostinato work, is a meditative practice. Can you talk about how your approach to stress and anxiety while performing as a musician and some of your meditative practices on the instrument?
Well, yeah, I think that's a good description. And I should say before we start that that's probably the only place in my life where I have that kind of peace. You have a strength in one area, and then you have these gaping deficits in other areas of your life. So, but I do my best to try and take that kind of Zen attitude of, just being who I am. I can't be better than I am in the moment, and be in the moment. We can get into that. I guess to begin with, the ostinato is like a meditation, and it's like a mantra. And so what happens, I believe, I'm not like a practitioner of TM, specifically, but I believe there is this entrainment, phenomena that happens that puts you in this, altered state. And the mind kind of abhors a vacuum. So it kicks you into this imaginative, sort of thinking in space. And on top of that is where, insight and these kinds of things come. So in holding an ostinato, it sort of kicks you into this creative space, and then because it's a repeated thing, the contrast against that and the sort of intuition that comes from that, is the creative part, and that would be the melodic aspects and the improvisation that happen over it. And as far as I've read and understood, which is not much, but Jung talks about man's fivefold psyche. Psyche means soul. Your soul is made up of your intellect and your emotions and your physical body and your intuition. And then, he talks about the fifth element being the divine, or, that's outside of us that holds this whole thing together, the energy in between the matter that makes us who we are and things as they are. So, when you think about these psychological types and aspects, all four of them, well, plus the divine, of course, you have to accept that part because that's reality. And but all four of those aspects have to be somewhat in balance. You have to be physically able to perform. You have to be intellectually aware and keyed into what's happening. It's an idea just kind of comes out of the subconscious, and you play it. You can't just go, "Wow, that was great." You have to be paying attention in order to repeat it and develop it, and do something with it that makes sense. And then emotionally, you have to play with feeling, but you can't get too emotional and overactive in that area. And then you have to play, with this openness and intuitiveness that allows for something to come through that isn't what you necessarily planned, and kind of go with that. So, to the best of my ability, that's how I describe the feeling of playing and being on stage. There's I've seen a lot of drummers play who are good examples of each one of those aspects, but maybe out of balance. Like there's a physical animal who's just like faster and stronger than anybody, but doesn't play with. Once you've seen 5 minutes of fast and strong, that's all there is. And there's emotional guys who are capable of playing with great feeling, but God forbid if they get in a fight with their girlfriend before they go on stage, then they can't play. There's the intellectual who could read fly specs, but if you ask him to play a simple beat with some feeling, he can't do that. And then there's the intuitive who might play something amazing one time, but not know where it came from, not know what it was, and not know how to repeat or develop it, and then be a very sort of inconsistent player. Where one night he's touched by God, and the next night he can't play to save his life. So all of these things I have felt within myself, and have tried to balance, and that's kind of the angle of what you do. And on a very practical and humble note, you just try and show up and do the best you can and let it go and live to play another day.
I imagine this is a thought process and a personal development that's taken decades of effort. Have you always felt this way about performing on the drums, or is this a recent evolution in your life? How has that come about?
I would say it's from reflection, and you don't read Jung unless you're in some kind of psychological pain, and I think pain is the touchstone of all growth. So we don't do anything unless it becomes painful for us, and we have to change. Our instincts are that strong, and we don't come out of the womb with this kind of a fully developed or growth oriented result. It just happens in life. When you're young, you play a certain way, you have certain motives. Like, for me, I wasn't good looking. I wasn't good in sports. I wasn't that smart, wasn't popular. But when I played the drums in 8th grade at a graduation party, some band was playing and I got to sit in. The whole class of 50 people stood around me with their mouths open and applauded. And so, when you get that sort of feedback, I'm sure it's like, selfish and egotistical, but you kind of go, okay, well, maybe this is where I can, share something with somebody else. And these realizations don't come, until many, many years later. You first you have to practice and learn and, go through the pain of that. It's not always fun to just focus, especially for a guy like me who's ADD, just focus on, these kinds of practice regimes and things that you have to learn and memorize. So, but I suppose, your motives are, well, nobody will like me, or fear-based, like I won't ever get a job, or I'll never be a drummer if I don't do this. So, motives are what they are, and they're all okay if you are aware of them and you know that everything's some kind of growing and learning experience. So, you just follow whatever happens. And I've been very lucky, in my life to have had certain experiences that have made me curious or, afraid of, not having what a dream or a goal is. So I just kind of chip away at it. And, when you're young too, you play to impress people and play maybe to, impress a girl or to feel good about yourself or to be rich and famous and, get material things. But after a while, and having had a little bit of success, I found that was, like a shipwreck, you end up beached somewhere and nobody can prepare you for how you'll, sort of handle any kind of fame. It's, now I try and live kind of a private life and just live like a poor person. I mean, not bottom level poor, but, just live a normal sort of frugal life. And I just have another thing, so I sent that in. You still there?
Yep.
Okay, good. So live like a poor person and have a rich inner life. A really great artist and teacher and mentor of mine, Efrain Toro, who's a brilliant percussionist and multi-talented musician and educator, and he's many, many things. He always says, after food, clothing, and shelter, what's the next thing? And he said, people are curious. And, that's what I found. You can have this rich inner life. If you find something you love to do, somehow it doesn't become a painful thing to work towards it. So I try and look at, like setting up my kid is stupid, it's an OCD nightmare and, like checklist at 747, but that's my instrument and I've developed it to this point, and every little nut and bolt's got to be in the right place, because if I'm playing and I want to do something and something isn't right, I mess up, So, I focus on that, and, you're bending and stretching and kind of warming up as you go. And then you're, prepared to go out there and just be free. So, a lot of these things didn't come to me until, I had crises of my own to go through and start looking for other ways of behaving and other ways of being, other attitudes, in order to live comfortably and kind of accept life on life's terms.
And I'm assuming you're happier now than you used to be as a result of these kind of constraints that you set on yourself to be more pure inwardly and happy.
I suppose. I mean, I don't know. Happiness. Define happiness. Abraham Lincoln says most people are as happy as they make up their minds to be. So I don't know if life is all happiness. You just, there's things you can change and there's things you can't change. And you have to know, what the difference between those things are. And, after a while you start thinking, well, okay, it's not so important to be rich and famous as it is, probably the best thing I do is to play the drums. So let's focus on playing the drums. And, there's always been some impetus there, some feedback, some payback I get from doing this, be it a peace of mind or sense of accomplishment or taking responsibility for yourself, or the rewards of getting to perform, that are enough to motivate me. So, and that's been a long process, to get to that point, cut out the extraneous stuff.
Can you talk about the connection between your art, the painting art, and the music and the physical drum set? Like, I would imagine one thing influences another, or one thing pushes another or takes away from another. How has art, becoming an artist, changed your drumming and your musical composition?
Well, I think that the element of space in my art is something I'm very influenced by Japanese calligraphy. I recently, 7 years ago, married a beautiful Japanese woman, Mayumi, my wife, and that was a great thing because I've been living part-time in Japan and just seeing the beauty of what would be the equivalent of 7-Elevens or any other sort of, communicative signs are beautiful to me over there. I don't know what they mean, but the shapes and the space of it is really great. So there's something that I've always liked about that. And my mom liked Japanese art too, and I didn't really know the difference, I think, but, until, I'd gone there maybe in the 70s, but, it was, there's a subtlety and a space, this thing, they call it ma, which is a sense of space. And, that's always been there in my art, in the good art. When I first started doing this, I took art classes and things like that in high school, but was never really good at it. And I was okay at pottery and not very good at jewelry. But that was all the techniques of perspective and this, and more of a science, and I could never relate to that. What I related to was just this natural space, how nothing in nature is straight. It's all curvy and modeled, and you look at rocks in the desert or a tree, and mountains and the ocean. It's just constantly changing. So that kind of thing has influenced me, and I started seriously drawing or pursuing it because I was curious and enjoyed it when I met Captain Beefheart, who, Don Van Vliet was a great fine artist. And he encouraged me, and the things he would say, like, oh, this is really free. I like this, this here. And, other things I'd show him that were more linear with shading and what have you, he didn't really respond the same way to, even though pretty much everything I do is abstract. So, I started to get a feeling for this looseness and this, something that doesn't need to be. It just is, like it is in nature. And so I kind of have been following that and somehow developed my own style, which leaves this space and uses, normally only one or two colors and some black and leaves the white space. So, as I did this more and more and collected, works that I'd, done over the years, I would look at my paintings and go, I wish I could make music like that. And of course, when it's like the beginning in the 80s and the new wave and the punk stuff is happening, that's, the opposite of space. It's like density and rebellion and all that kind of stuff. So I think I, have developed more of that sense of space. Another influence that way was, Miles Davis and Weather Report in the 70s. That music to me is still some of the best that's ever been made, and had such a broad spectrum of influences that they brought into jazz. That jazz was no longer ding ding a ding ding a ding. It was it was like film music. It had a mood to it. It had a ambience, and everybody's playing at the same time. Nobody's soloing, but everybody's soloing and leaving space. Just these concepts, and I finally was able to develop myself and in my compositions, and so I think it did influence me that way.
You have a very hands-on approach to building your sets, your drum set, your equipment.
Yeah, that's something that started from the very beginning too. When I wanted to be a drummer, I can remember back in the 50s, black and white TV, the little Ricky on the I Love Lucy show and Cubby O'Brien on the Mickey Mouse Club show were the first children I saw play the drums. And that's when I knew I wanted to play the drums. My father had a great, music collection and was an accordion player with tremendous talent, and he could, silence the room. He was a child prodigy, so when he played, people would beg him to play, and he'd say, "No, I don't got it anymore. No, I haven't been practicing," stuff like this. But then he'd finally play, and the power he had to draw everybody inside and make people cry when he played was a power that I was just envious of as a 4 to 6 year old kid. I just wanted that. And, when I knew I wanted to play the drums, he had a Tito Puente album, and my mother and him had just bought some Haywood Wakefield nesting tables, which were, solid birch and three different sizes, and so three different tones of the wood, and they sounded kind of like bongos to a little kid. So I was playing on these three tables and telling my uncle, hey, did you see my set of bongos? And I just pull out the nesting tables and start playing the Tito Puente album. So from there, when I was 10, I got a set of bongos, and the first thing I did was take them apart. I put the block that connects them as a on the floor, and then angled one of the drums down like a shell tom. And that was my tom-tom. And then I took the small one and I put a piece of loose leaf paper over it with a rubber band, and that sounded like a snare drum. I had a crumpled up high voltage sign from a telephone pole that I tied to a string to the inner screws that held it together so it wouldn't ride away when I hit it. And I played with broken arrows from my archery set. And then there was another thing I remember. We had a small, like, toy pool table, that was about, I don't know, maybe 1 foot by 2 feet or something like that. And I put when this innovation in the 50s, I think it was the late 50s, with MJB Coffee came out with a coffee canister. It was a tin can that had a plastic top on it. And when it was empty, it sounded like tuned drums. So you'd get the different sizes of these coffee canisters, and I put them on the pool table so they wouldn't slip off, and, take the base off my globe, and which looked like a cymbal, and put it in a wine bottle with another arrow from my archery set, keeping that suspended, and that was my drum set. And I would play along with the Beach Boys and surf drum music, the Ventures, Sandy Nelson, all that kind of, the Safaris, of course. And so that was, my way of getting into this kind of, build your own sort of method. And when I got my first drum set, one of the first things I did maybe a year or two later was my brother was taking a metal shop class, and I showed him the tom holder, which had an L arm that was out of knurled 1/4-inch rod. And I said, "Can you make me a U-shaped arm that would fit on this bracket here, and I could put another tom-tom on there?" And so, I've been just building and expanding ever since, and I guess it's just a natural thing for me.
Has your work...
I love architecture.
Oh, cool.
I'm sorry. I love architecture and design. Some of my favorites were, Mies van der Rohe and Breuer and Le Corbusier, and that was sort of their, cold rolled steel furniture with the black leather straps and stuff was sort of the inspiration behind my drum set in the second tour of Missing Persons, where I got 3 patents for it. I invented this electronic drum kit that was just a wand that kind of came up from the floor and went in front of me and had 32 sound sources in it. And then there was another couple of lines. One of them was short and angular, and the other one was long and high and curvilinear. And it supported the cymbal bars up above my head. So I made this sort of Bauhaus abstract black sculpture, and played that. So there's always just been this thing, with that. And I always say I spend more time under the hood of my drum set than I do driving it.
Well, one thing I love about your drum set is it looks like a piece of art itself. And
yeah. There's always been an art and a beauty to drum sets, and I was a jazz musician from late teens to early 20s when I was studying jazz and classical music, and you'd go to the club and you sit there and you just look at the kit and wonder how that guy play and why he set up this way and that way and things like that, and so I think my drum set became more sculptural the larger it got, and when I went to a rack system, with the tubes, I realized how much space the tripods took up on the floor that impaired you having more things to play with your feet. So that was one of the first things I realized is I can add more bass drums and different pitches and different sounds, different percussion instruments. And I'm always fooling around like that. And then the other thing I noticed was, why am I putting these beautiful round drums, in this cage straight tubes? So I got some curved tubes from DW and started to make more of a sculptural aspect. And once again, the form follows function. It's got to, wrap around the drums in a way where I can reach everything and it makes sense. And then the back end, is always abstract. I don't like even symmetrical things. I like things that are, asymmetrical. So I have a big gong high on the left, so the rack goes up high, and then it kind of swoops down, and there's a little more horizontal for a rack of tuned gongs, of which there's 12, I think.
And has your interest in art and architecture and your personal development influenced the kinds of sounds that you want to get out of the instruments you design? I know a lot of the components of your drum set wouldn't have existed were it not for you and your design. And I'm wondering about your inspiration for sounds and how that's evolved over time, given your personal hobbies and passion for architecture and art.
Yeah, I think there's a correlation between all three, disciplines. Stravinsky talks a great deal about him being an architectonic composer, and he really I've read all his books, and he's a fascinating guy and an amazing teacher because he's a giant of 20th century music, and you put these guys on a pedestal, and then when he was capable of really some funny things he would say, and also a really intense intellect and curiosity. But he at one point was asked, how do you compose? And he said, I compare it to the act of a pig foraging for truffles. You stick your nose in the dirt until you smell something that smells good. And you can just imagine him sitting. He would play on a slightly out of tune piano that was muffled with felt on the strings, because in those days he didn't want anybody to hear what he was working on and steal his ideas. And so he worked very privately. You could just imagine him hunched over the piano, playing a chord and then changing the fingerings, and then having that these are the notes I want to work with. And then you take those notes and you take them apart and look at them sideways and upside down and backwards and what have you, and you make a piece like the Rite of Spring out of it, So which boils down, to basically a couple of he mainly uses this octatonic scale. It's like a diminished scale. It goes whole step, half step, whole step, half step, and it's a very geometric scale. And so all things apply to music as well. I look at composing as like a crossword puzzle. You have a horizontal line, which is the timeline, and then you have a vertical aspect, which is higher and lower in pitch, and then you have this vertical aspect as what events are stacked on top of each other at any point along the timeline. So that's your harmony, and then there's orchestration, which is what sounds, if you play a rhythm on a little bell, it has a different effect than playing the same identical rhythm or musical idea on a huge bass drum. So if you then get into combining sounds or choosing what sounds you want, you can have a lot of contrast. And I think music is all about contrast between melody and harmony and rhythm and dynamics and high pitch and low pitch and fast and slow, and this combination of sounds, that combination of sounds, fast, slow, busy, sparse, all those kinds of things are the ingredients that you just mess around with. And if you can boil all that stuff, to me, I would spend a lot of time especially I think in the 80s and 90s, when I'd be doing drum clinics or touring, there's nothing to do on a plane, and we didn't have the internet yet. And I would, read the Harvard Brief Dictionary of Music and look up something like ostinato, and it'd say, see also, blah, 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 and you'd go and you'd follow that. And then after you identify these, concepts, it's easy to sort of identify a kind of a list of concepts. It's about a paragraph of information is all of music, conceptually. And then you can kind of take cues and encompass those concepts in your improvising and in your playing and in your musical expression. So I think that's my technique in a nutshell. Whenever I find a new idea, I work out all the permutations of that idea and kind of encompass its concept. And then you just, put together the little letters of that alphabet that you found to make small words, and then the words into a sentence, and then tell a story with music.
That's a great lead-in to your box set. I've listened to 3 CDs of the 4, and some beautiful, beautiful music. I didn't get liner notes with my copy of it, so Billy sent it to me, and
Great.
I'm assuming it was all performed on your drum kit. Is that true?
No. I sampled my drums and I composed everything the way I would play it on the drums. There may be a few things in there I can't do, like if you put certain little hi-hat rhythms or something together, I may not be able to physically have, been able to coordinate that if certain things were happening at the same time. But for the most part, it was how I would ideally want to play the drums to each thing. Or, having played some things live, you just program in the beat that you played and program a fill, your ideal fill at that point. That's why it's called composer series. It's not performer series. People see me play all the time, and there's enough recorded history there where they can see my style at different times, but they don't know that whole private side of me. And that's something that you get to this point in your life where you want to compose, you want to be more than what you are. So I think it was around 40 I started to compose my chamber work stuff based on some of my ostinatos that I was playing at the time. And so I just found that it's just this process of like the crossword puzzle, and you just keep chipping away at it. And I enjoyed the process, and I enjoyed the results of getting to program it into MIDI and play the drums along with it, and then make a CD of that, and then getting to play it with a string quartet and woodwind quintet in Vienna with Alex Makacek and Gerald Preinfalk, and then getting to play it with a 60-piece orchestra with the Metropole Orchestra in Holland. So, once you get the bug, you just have to do it, and so you just do it, and it's fun, and it's very rewarding. I mean, the key thing is to not judge. When I was talking to a therapist, this woman was wonderful, and she would, I was always afraid of, how I was going to make a living and this, that, and the other. And she goes, "Well, how did you get the gig with Zappa?" And I said, "Well, the phone rang." "Well, how'd you get the gig with Jeff Beck?" "Well, the phone rang." She goes, "Don't change your phone number." So I haven't. The other thing she says is you have to look at all your creative works as a MacGuffin. And I said, "What's a MacGuffin?" And she said, "It's something that you do, like fooling around in the garage, building a birdhouse or whatever. It's just an experiment that's only for yourself and that nobody's going to see." And so once you have that sort of thing, like, this is who I am, you just put a few notes on and you think, "Oh, that's cool," and then maybe you don't do anything with it, and then you discover it a year later and you go, "Wow, I can do something more with this now," as you're a different person than you were a year later, and you don't have the same mindset or maybe the same blockages that you had at the time you stopped. So you know, just continue on, and with your new tools and your new attitude, you can complete things that you sort of dismissed as like, well, I liked this at first, but I never followed through with it. So this is that part of me. This is my private stuff, all my MacGuffins. This music I did for myself, and that's another thing, that time what we were talking about earlier, just the subconscious act of, and the automatic act of, like, automatic writing or automatic composing or improvising without knowing what it is that you're going to do. It takes preparation to have the techniques to do that. But on the other hand, I did most of the composing of that whole box set, kind of watching TV and, maybe watching David Letterman, let's say. You'd watch his monologue, which was funny to me at the time. And then he'd have some actress on or whatever that I wasn't interested in what she was saying. And so you reach over to the computer and you start plugging in a few things, and, or during the commercials or whatnot. And then you get involved. And then you wake up the next morning and you play it back and you go, wow, this is good, And then that, makes you feel like you want to do more with it. And it's that kind of a process of just following this, unconscious thing. It's almost like it happens in spite of you. and that's the real stuff, or at least what I think is the real stuff, because, nobody makes music like that. Of course, there's influences, and the bottom, I think the true goal of any artist is to look inside, find what's unique and authentic and beautiful that pleases you, and then to bring that out and share it with other people. And whether they like it or not, like, history just shows us every damn artist that was great, was hated and then became great when somebody could, sell his work after and not have to pay him. But you know what I mean? So, and then, this guy Sloninsky that I mentioned earlier has a great book called A Lectionary of Musical Invective, which is all the worst reviews of the greatest composers since the time of Mozart or Beethoven. And, Debussy, sounding like catcalls at a zoo or a riot at a zoo. They're just scathing, and because the quote at the beginning of the book says, that most man's problems are based on his non-acceptance of the unfamiliar. And so, that's the whole concept. Whatever's new, until you get used to it, maybe something that a closed-minded person would dislike. And, expectations kind of a planned disappointment. So, if you have an expectation that music should be this, and it's not that, then, most humans would be pissed off and non-accepting of that. And, I may not like all music, classical or, critically acclaimed, or new music as well. That's maybe music concrete or something that's hard to listen to, or that I feel I could improvise something, more musical than that. But on the other hand, it's all just, you have to look a little deeper. There may be a mathematical formula and sound creation and synthesis or something that's of merit there. That was the artist's focus, not what I'm expecting to hear,
Well, then I would say kudos to you, because as I was listening to the box set, it took me a while, and I thought, it sounds like his drumming, which is so musical in and of itself.
Oh yeah, it's my samples, man.
Yeah.
It's my samples. It's my kit, and the sounds are there. That was sampled quite a while ago, back in Austin, maybe 20 years old now, but. It's my drums. They're tuned the way I like, and I can get. When you play drums, my solo drumming really is built to be played solo, because the drums and percussion are non-specific pitch instruments. Although I tune to specific pitches, there's a lot of harmonics and overtones that can cloud the issue. So now with MIDI, I've solved that problem, and the fundamental pitches come out in any hall, and so that helps. But you take a little bit of a different approach when you're a composer. It's not it's not about me as a player and what I want to play. It's about possibly composing an interesting drum part, or else how can the drum part enhance the music that's happening. So it's a whole different mindset. Sitting on this side of the desk as opposed to being the performer who wants to do what he likes to do. So you have that kind of freedom and that control, and I think that it doesn't matter so much to me that my old drum set doesn't have a chromatic set of piccolo toms, but just it is 8. It works for I make it work for in the band context where percussion can kind of get relegated to extraneous background noise.
Yeah, so speaking of which, how has composition worked with other bands in terms of the drums being a compositional instrument instead of a percussive or background instrument?
One of my feathers in my cap, would be Alex Makachek's Sick, which is spelled F-I-C with the apostrophe. And when we were recording the Bozzio Prime Folk Makachek material, he said, one of the things I want to do in this week or two we had for recording is, just let you go in and do a solo, kind of like classical music, do whatever you want, and then I'm going to compose on that. So, go in and do whatever you want. And of course I did, and I don't remember anything I did, but he took that and composed the most amazing music. It's probably 15 minutes long of just amazing stuff. So every fill and every little fast lick and space and everything is doubled and harmonized with guitar and bass, and it's a really beautiful piece. And we played the front part of it live, which was challenging, and because it's kind of like modern chamber music for a trio: guitar, bass, and drums. And so that piece, if you ever get a chance to look at that, you can see how compositional my playing is, even when I don't know what the end result is going to be. So, you know what I mean? And there's some composers who that's their concept. He worked with a guy in Austria who's a brilliant composer and basically does this kind of thing. He invites other musicians and he just puts them in a room and lets them play all by themselves. And or other artists who use found objects or sing or do anything, noisemakers, what have you. And then he'll make a piece out of what they did. And it's a beautiful concept, and it all sounds very interesting.
That's excellent. I don't want to take up more of your time. I'm sure you've got something at the top of the hour. So I just want to say thank you again for your art and your music and what you do, and it's really encouraging and beautiful to see you perform live on this tour. So keep it up, and you're inspiring a lot of people out there.
Oh, thank you very, very much. I truly appreciate it. It's my pleasure to be able to speak about things like this in that kind of depth. So it's good for me too. So thanks very much, and I hope we'll talk again soon.
Thank you very much, Terry. And again, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
My pleasure.
Okay.
All the best.
Have a good one. Bye.
Bye. You too. Bye.